Okay, first up is Genu, and I think the character is looking great. Um, Good shapes, everything's clearly lined up well. One thing you might want to consider is doing a detail drawing of the hand from the top so that you have something to work with when modeling that. Yeah, I'm really liking the seeing the face from all these different angles. I think that's going to help a lot as you move forward with the model, and just to really understand the shape of the head. But yeah, it's looking great. I mean, there's still things in there where in some cases the nose is just sort of suggested by a line. So it's a little hard to say, well, okay, how does that integrate with the rest of the face? But I think by seeing it from these different angles, you can kind of use your imagination. And obviously, you have the side view where you get that, the detail of what the profile looks like. So, yeah, and then there's loads of nice reference images here. I like this. I just think that we're missing sort of the foreground, like what's on the ground itself, and in between unless it's just grass, but it might be nice to have other objects. I can see you've added this bench, which I think is a good idea, and that could make for a good foreground object and for something for the main character to interact with. Yeah, more reference images. Yeah, so that's all of them. So I think this is great stuff. I think, yeah, the only thing I can think of now that would help you out is the hands, and then just think about the ground, and the ground itself, and then any foreground objects for your environment. Okay, this is Tia, and yeah, this is looking much improved. Definitely some better shape in here. There's some funny proportion stuff. In particular, it looks like the feet got really small. I kind of suspect you ran out of space on the page or something and made them smaller than normal, but I think, maybe get some photo reference of some boots that you like and use that for the boots rather than just the drawing. I think the face needs more work. I don't have a clear concept of what the face looks like just from that. So I think you need a more detailed drawing in the face, and then maybe it's good that you have this side view, but maybe from some other angles as well. I mean, it seems like a mostly humanoid face with just very large eyes. And one thing to think about eyes is there's sort of the eyeballs, and then there's the eyelids, and it's like the eyeballs are going to be spheres pretty much no matter what. I don't recommend doing non-spherical eyeballs. While it is possible to achieve, it's just unless you're going real cartoony, that looks kind of strange. So, and then the eyelids are formed around the eyeballs and the skull, and so thinking about. So I guess then the question becomes, what makes those eyes so big? Is it that more of that they have very big eyeballs, and or that more of them are exposed than on a human, or both? And would those eyeballs as spheres fit nicely in the head? Maybe kind of sort of sketch how big you imagine the eyeballs to be, because you could imagine being very big based on how much of them we see, and depending on how much curve there is there. So it's like, um, and then would they even be so big that they kind of overlapped each other in the middle? So just kind of think about that stuff and think about the skull that would fit around it and how big it would be, um, and just generally more detail and shape to the face I think would be helpful. Um, yeah, I think that's all right. Again, I think I would get photo reference for the gun, and I think it's okay to do a fictional gun, but what I would do is combine parts of existing guns, or even existing, excuse me, even existing objects that aren't guns. Maybe you like the handle from some modern appliance that looks different and more futuristic, or some other kind of source. So you can maybe kind of patch together a few uh, either things from actual guns or from just other kind of technological objects you can find. And then there's some street images as reference. Yeah, I think you really need to think through exactly what part of what city you want to show. So let's open the Maya file. Okay, here's Tia's environment. Yeah, I mean, I think you've thought through pretty well doing kind of an enclosed area. I think there's some proportion issues. For example, the size of this car versus the size of that door versus the size of this garage door. Like, this garage thing is going to be bigger than that, but this door is going to be similar in size to that. So there's a lot of proportion issues. And then there's this kind of opening here, like what's beyond there, what kind of fills the view, because you kind of have to put something in there. You can't have nothing. So you got to think about those key things, and sort of the width of the sidewalk. And I think this should be a bit more based on some photo reference than these drawings, because you've got, look at the size of the fire hydrant compared to, the size of the car and the building and the doors and those kinds of things. So and the size of the sidewalk. So there's a lot of proportion stuff that's kind of all over the place and needs a lot of work, and therefore I would, maybe kind of collage together some photo reference rather than trying to use these drawings, because I don't think they're going to give you the set you need. But I think if you can figure out a way to kind of enclose this in, conceptually it's a good idea to have this sort of street corner as your set. You might want to think of some other foreground things in here as well. Maybe that just means another car, but I don't want you going off and building a whole bunch of cars, because cars are very time-consuming things to build. So you may want to import one or something like that. But yeah, let's go to photo reference and kind of collage it together in a scene rather than trying to use these drawings. Okay. This is Maddie, and yeah, the face is looking good. I think you might want to do a little bit more, just kind of on the lips and the transition into the lips, kind of how the nose ends and the lips begin. Maybe look at some photo reference and kind of just get a little more detail there, because right now, again, it's just sort of suggested with these lines, but when you're faced with having to build that in 3 dimensions, I think you're going to want to see how this nose kind of terminates and how it transitions into the upper lips and so forth. So might be worth spending a little bit of time on that. And yeah, this is looking good, pretty straightforward. I think this should work well for this class. Very asymmetrical clothing. And what I would do is, again, for this anyways, we're only going to build what we see, so you can build the arms up, or even if you want, build the whole neck, head, top of torso, just depending on how much you think you'll see. But you don't necessarily need to build for example, the legs and body underneath the pants and shirt. And some good reference. Yeah, very orthographic view there. I think we've seen that before. That's some good reference. Yeah, all this is really good reference, and I think it'll help you flesh out the space, because I think that's what it needs, is more detail. And I think consider having some reference, just photos of a whole bar put together, and to give you inspiration for a lot of the little details that you might find in there. But yeah, this is looking good. Okay, this is Hend, and yeah, the character I think is looking pretty good. Yeah, I'm still concerned about how some of this will help you model in 3D when you start dealing with the eye shape and stuff, but you'll just kind of have to sort that out, you know, in 3 dimensions to some extent. You might want to look at, I know this is very cartoony, but you still might want to look at some photo reference about how eyes look in the side view to get some inspiration on that. Yeah, I can see that you've started to flesh out some details and think about some backstory in the room, so it's definitely looking like a more kind of thought through and fleshed out space. And I think all these reference choices are good and will really help you, you know, fill out the space and make it look more lived in. And most of this stuff is pretty simple models. I think, you know, the teddy bear I could see being a little time consuming, but you know, you can you know, just keep it pretty simple as long as it's not too close to the camera. You can get away with a fairly simple model. So yeah, you might want to, you have that top view of the hand. I thought I said something in the last module about cleaning up that hand so that it's you know, fingers are slightly spread apart and correct length and stuff. Maybe not. Anyway, you should get a clean up version of the hand. Yeah, and it's looking good. Sorry, here's the corrected hand we were talking about. One thing to think about is when you look at a hand, the base of the fingers kind of start on a curve, so the pinky is going to start kind of lower down here. So it matters where you put these kind of start and ends, and there's sort of a curve to it. So I would work on that, and I think also just giving a sense of the finger segments and the knuckles. So you want some indication of where the knuckles are and where the segments begin and end. So I put a little bit more time into the shape on this, and there is another face from the 3/4 view. Yeah, that's looking good, and I think that's going to help a lot as well. Okay, this is Cindy, and yeah, this is looking nice. Just getting a little closer on here so we can see some of the detail you've put in, which looks really good. Definitely getting a sense of the head. Looks like it has a lot of character. I think that should work well. I like the outfit, it's complex. So that'll be a bit challenging to model these kind of different interesting pieces, but all definitely possible. Yeah, boots look good, and I like the thought through detail. The hand detail looks really nice. So yeah, I think this is quite a good character drawing, and I think that's going to serve you well. Yeah, some good reference and color studies, so that's good. And these kinds of things will help a lot. You know, if you're going to actually build the laces and not just texture them on, if you're going to do laces, you might find them to be quite time consuming. So just be aware of that. Okay. So we're looking at a top view of the room. I think that's helpful. It's always a good thing to do. And yeah, a lot of the different props and stuff. It's good planning. It's all pretty straightforward to build all that stuff. It'll take no time. Yeah, I think that you know, if you can find photo reference of these chairs and tables, that's going to serve you a lot better than these kind of very simple sketches. I think you had some photo reference of some of the chairs in a previous module. That's some nice detailed drawing though. That's going to help. And I like your doing this whole logo here. That's really cool. Yeah, so really good work. I especially think the character is coming together very nicely. I think, yeah, just make sure you have all the reference lined up for all the props and stuff in the set, and kind of the final overall view of the set. Next up is Kareem, and yeah, I think the character is looking basically good. Let's take a look at that hand. It's a little hard to tell there, but maybe a little bit more detail on that, and on the segments. It's just sort of low res here, so it's a bit hard to see. Yeah, I mean, I think the accessories are nice that you've got going on here. Character shape is pretty straightforward. It's good that you've done a 3/4 view. Still fairly cartoony look. So again, I think there'll be some challenge on translating that to 3D, but it's definitely good progress. Yeah, this is interesting, I guess. I like the floor panels and the little bits of detail on them. I think that's good. I think about what other things would be on the wall, and if maybe there'd be a more kind of dimensional shapes on the wall rather than the flat area. For these, you might want to do some, I think maybe you had some in the previous module, but some of the more reference of what this stuff looks like, and overall it looks a little empty. So thinking about what kind of other equipment or machinery or furniture or those kinds of things you might find in this space. What is this space used for? And it looks like the bridge of a spaceship, and so do they need some kind of chair to sit in, or those kinds of thinking about those kinds of things, or is there emergency equipment around, or try and come up with some of that stuff. You can use things like the interiors of submarines or battleships or something as kind of contemporary reference, or looking at other sci-fi things can be good inspiration as well. So yeah, I think kind of fleshing this out with like what is in this space and what is it used for and what does it look like. But you've got the basic kind of walls and stuff, but not much in it to sort of flesh it out. So I think a little bit more about that would help. Next up is Michelle, and you mentioned you'd want to do a whole bunch of skyscrapers to have a much bigger environment, and I'm going to encourage you to actually steer away from that and do a much smaller thing, at least for this class. I mean, the thing about something like doing a whole bunch of skyscrapers is that, there's some advantage in that there's, once you build like one floor, you can sort of repeat it and duplicate it and kind of build the whole thing. But the problem is that if the camera's ever close to the character, it's probably only going to show typically a fairly small portion of one of the buildings, unless the building is way far in the background behind the character. So, which is possible, but then what is the character in the air? And I don't want to get into the character flying for this class, just because it's hard enough just to do the normal kind of believable gravity character being on the ground. So keep the character on the ground, do a much more confined environment of just the base of one of these skyscrapers, or a corner represented by two buildings, that kind of thing, and just build get some photo reference as a starting point and build an environment based on that, because you could build a bunch of very simple kind of primitive looking skyscrapers, certainly, but they're not going to have any real detail, and if the camera gets close to any part of those skyscrapers, it's going to fall apart because there simply isn't time to do a lot of detail on a lot of buildings. You could do a lot of detail on a very small area, and that's what I'm encouraging you to do. The character, I think this needs more work. I think you should really get some photo reference, some anatomy reference. With the arms, there's not much of a sense of shoulder, or where the elbow begins to end, and where the forearm begins and ends, and the wrist is formed. It's just lacking some anatomy. The proportions look a little odd, like the length of the torso versus the legs, the height of the crotch, the shape of the knees, the size of the feet. Everything looks a little off. So I'd really encourage you to get some photo reference and really kind of draw your inspiration from that. Because right now things are looking just off with the character. And I understand, in a cartoony world you can exaggerate or de-emphasize any of the proportions you want, but in this case it doesn't look like it's done very kind of intentionally to kind of give it more character. It just looks, there's a bunch of things that look just kind of off. And you'll also want to make sure that it looks like maybe you've done some of that, but making sure the front and side are in the same proportions. This has actually got a lot more shape and anatomy to it from the side than we did in the front, whereas we're not seeing the arms at all, but I am getting a sense of thigh muscle, of the knee shape, of the calf, and that's good, which I kind of not seeing as nicely down in the front. Getting that kind of clear thigh shape versus the knee. We kind of lost the knee here and stuff like that. So there's definitely better work here on this side, but still, go back to that anatomy reference and work from that. And again, I'm going to discourage you to do some huge city scene and just try to make a small, kind of narrow, confined environment instead. Okay, this is how you, and I think this is looking a little. I like that it's sort of a fun concept, but the drawing is looking very rushed and sketchy. There's not a lot of thought to shapes like, how the neck resolves into the clavicle and chest, and where are the shoulders and elbow. There's not really a wrist versus the hand. There's not a base of the hand and fingers. It's just these sort of little scribbles of fingers. So I really think the kind of time and effort wasn't put into this that it requires. And just look at this foot versus that. The feet should be facing forward, and here this one's out to the side, and that one's kind of facing forward. It all looks very kind of rushed and messy and uneven. And I don't think that's going to work well for you. And then there's fairly big questions about, is the head a cube? Does it have a flat front? Is it a rounded front? It's not really clear. And is this, normally you build stuff in a neutral expression, but these eyes look like they're in a certain position. Are those kind of like lumps on the front of a cube? And if that is the front of the cube, how come we're seeing it from this side? Or is it more of a cylinder-shaped head and we're seeing it from the side? It's not really clear to me. And again, there's not just much shape to the body here. Again, where does the chest begin and end, and the kind of abdomen start and end? Thigh indicating a knee. And suddenly the feet are very, very small in this view, where they look much, much bigger in that view, and things aren't proportional to the front and side view. So. And also, it's just not clear. Like, what does this mouse look like in 3D? Is it just kind of an opening, and what do the teeth look like, and can the mouth open and close, and what's its sort of neutral expression? So I just feel like this leaves a lot of questions, and I would say go back to the drawing board and try to do something more kind of humanoid and less out there. And the wings on the ears, I would just kind of not go there, because suddenly that represents a whole other kind of rigging situation we have to deal with, and another whole very complex animation. You'll really have your hands full just trying to get the normal number of limbs to kind of move in a believable way, but then to have to add some wings on the side of the head to have them look natural, and either make the character move around, or even if they don't and they're just there, just to make that believable. It's just adding more. It's hard enough just to get a normal humanoid character to move in a believable way, so I would lose the wings too. So all of that together, I would say go back to the drawing board and try something different for the character, because I don't think this is going to serve you well for the class. And also, by the way, it looks really kind of rushed and not that well finished. I guess we do have some of our a little bit more questions answered with some of these drawings. If it is indeed a cube, and then again the side view doesn't make that much sense, but getting a mouth to get a fully square kind of rectangular shape and a big smile and this shape, that's really hard to do. and while these eyes might be kind of cute and sort of make sense in a 2D drawing, it's hard for me to imagine what those would look like in 3D. And again, the head's just a big cube, so it's not really, there's not a lot of forming and shaping to that. So, I mean, the option is then to like do kind of animated textures on a flat face would be kind of an approach where I would probably go for this, where you're actually not doing a 3D model of the mouth and the eyes, but in fact you're doing essentially 2D animations on the surface, which is the 3D-dimensional model of the face. So that could be an option, but I don't know. I think that's going to be tough. Yeah, kind of real sketchy looking here. I'll definitely get some photo reference going for this of what the overall room could look like, so that you have it in perspective and you can see a lot more of the details of what could go in there. Very simple, straightforward bed, bay windows, nice. TV is very simple, kind of. Yeah, so it's a pretty simple environment. I think, thinking about what sort of objects, I mean, the furniture is almost as primitive as furniture gets. By primitive, I mean built out of primitives like cylinders and cubes and those kinds of things. So, yeah, get some photo reference of an actual lived-in room, and that'll help you kind of inspire you to think of some of the other things and kind of give the character a little bit more sense of who they are. But I'm struggling to see this character working well. I think if you do, or if you're determined to use it, I think you definitely need to redraw the body, and you either need to really think about what those eyes actually look like in 3 dimensions and what that mouth would actually look like in 3 dimensions, or go a different route and do like 2D animation of the face. But the problem is like that 2D animation is a very time-consuming thing to do, kind of the different mouth poses and transitioning from one mouth pose. It's really a whole big project that I'm not really encouraging you to go down that road in this class. And again, I don't think the wings are a good idea, because again, it's just another complex thing when it's going to be hard enough just to get the body to move well. This is Hayden, and yeah, this is looking good. It's looking pretty fleshed out. There's something about this that looks a little kind of off kilter, because I'm starting like in the middle of his forehead, and then I'm ending up on one side. That should go right down the middle. So I think you need to kind of straighten him out, and it might be something you can just do in Photoshop. And yeah, there's some good detail. I think, this arm's shorter than that arm. It doesn't really matter because you only build one side and mirrored it over. But, you want your drawings to be symmetrical. I think there could be a little bit more indication of kind of what's happening in the kind of the crotch and hips area, kind of the shape of the thigh versus the shape of the calf. It's kind of getting lost there. I think some photo reference for the boots would really help you out. The vase seems to have a lot of character, and I think that's good. And it's nice you did both the front and the back. The side view is looking pretty good, and there's a little bit more of the of the shape of the leg and the knee, indication of the knee, and there's more fleshed out boot. But again, I think some photo reference for boots might serve you better than the drawings you have. And yeah, the facial stuff looks good. I understand it's a cartoony character, but the forehead is very short, so be aware for that compared to an actual human, which would have a much higher forehead. So you might consider having a taller forehead if you want it to be based more on realistic anatomy, which it doesn't have to be, but you might like the look of it a little better. So maybe experiment with a taller forehead. I think the idea of the different stuff in the room, it looks pretty fleshed out and kind of believable. And then again, get some good photo reference for those kind of lockers, chairs, beds, table, those kinds of things. I think it's going to help you out a lot, but it's sort of a good plan. You got some detailed drawings. These we've seen. Okay. Yeah, I think this is coming along well. I think, a few improvements on the character drawing and then gathering photo reference for your environment will be what we should focus on next. And think about maybe light sources. Are there windows in the room? It's okay if they're kind of off camera, but maybe think about light source and light direction. You've got these indoor lights, and maybe you want like a source of natural light as well. Okay, this is Stephanie, and yeah, I can see some improvements here, and that's good. I think this side view, you might kind of think a little bit more about what those eyes will look like from the side. I think they would not look like this, and a little bit more about how the lids interact with the eyeball, because right now it's not that clear. The arms are quite short, and I think I talked the last time about that being a limitation of what you can do with the character, but I think you do want to add some kind of shoulder shape and some kind of indication of where the elbow begins and ends, and defining the forearm a little bit more. And then we've got this one. It's just oops. Yeah, it's good to see these different views of the head. I think, yeah, I do think maybe thinking about the eyes and working on the eye design a little bit more and getting a sense of the eyelids and the eyelid shape and where they begin and end would help, because right now it sort of looks like she doesn't have eyelids, or it's not clear like what part is the eyelid and what part is the head, so maybe more defined eyelids and kind of work out some of that detail a little bit better. Got this room sketch. The thing about the room sketch is that I cannot see, so your images don't become embedded in the Maya file, and I'll show you what I mean. If you take a look at the attribute editor, you can see this path, so it's looking on, in users, Stephanie, James, documents, da, 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 da. So it's looking in that folder. Now, of course, I don't have that folder on my computer, so Maya just points to the image files in the folder that they're on the computer. They're not embedded in the Maya file. If you want to send me these images in the Maya file, rather than just saving your scene file, you need to do File, Archive Scene. And you'll see it creates this zip file, and then if you send me that zip file, it'll bundle together both the scene file and the images that are included in it, and I'll actually be able to see them. So right now I would say resubmit those, because I can't see on this small thumbnail what's going on there very well, but it looks pretty sketchy, so I don't know. Think about kind of just the area of this room, or the room that you're going to make like it, that is going to be included, and get detailed with just the area you want to include, and that the camera will show, and you don't have to build everything from every angle. Just pick kind of a portion that gives the character enough room to move around in a limited way, and then just detail that area, and then we won't move the camera all over the space. So come up with a kind of the portion of the room you want to detail, and if you don't have to send it to me in my scene file, but if you decide to do that, you need to use Archive Scene.